You're listening to Sports Radio Detroit.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the NBA Minute right here on Sports Radio Detroit. A special episode, the second episode this week. I hope you guys aren't getting sick of me. I hope everybody's enjoying their week. The regular season is over. The playoffs are upon us. I am super excited. I cannot wait to talk basketball. So this podcast, yesterday I did an episode about just Magic stepping down and Dirk and Wade retiring, just kind of all the madness that went around the NBA. And there's even been more stuff about the Kings firing Dave Yeager and all sorts of crazy stuff. But we're gonna leave that to the side right now because I want to talk the basketball. I want to talk the playoffs because this is the stuff I've been living for. So this podcast will be, I'll go through each series, make my prediction, and kind of explain where my head's at going into each series, what I'm looking forward to. And, of course, I'll do, once again, my all-NBA teams and all defensive teams as well as all the awards. And so without further ado, let's jump into it. Now, let's just start off by just highlighting the playoff schedule because we'll go playoffs first and then we'll get into the award stuff. So, playoffs start on Saturday, April 13th, this Saturday. We are recording right now on a Thursday for reference here. And it kicks off at 2:30 with the 6th seed Brooklyn Nets going against the 3 seed Philadelphia 76ers. And then followed by the Orlando Magic and Toronto Raptors at 5. Then it goes to the West Coast for 2 games with the Clippers versus the Warriors. And the Spurs at the Nuggets at 10:30 is the final game. So those are the 4 on Saturday. The 4 on Sunday are Indiana versus Boston at 1 p.m. And then followed by OKC Portland at 3:30. Then Detroit Milwaukee at 7. And hey, guess what? Detroit Pistons. We are not on NBA TV, at least for this game. We have one game on NBA TV, but that's it. 9:30. The Jazz and the Rockets kick off, and that will complete the game 1. So that's the schedule for the weekend. Now I'm just going to go in order by conference, by seeding. That's kind of how I'll attack these matchups. But one of the things, just a quick side note before we get into all the NBA playoff talk, is I really love that there's no NBA TV series this year. There's only 3 games in, at least as of right now, 3 games are scheduled for NBA TV. 2 of the San Antonio Denver games are scheduled on NBA TV, and then one of the Pistons Bucks games, I think it's game 2, is scheduled for NBA TV. So I like that the NBA TV, or that the NBA kind of flipped the schedule to kind of put as little games on NBA TV as possible. I like that they didn't just dedicate a whole series, that they took a game here, a game there, and so that at least every fan gets to see their team on primetime national television, and that's cool, especially as like a Pistons fan. Like it would have really just been a little bit disheartening if the Pistons were stuck on NBA TV for the whole series and we didn't get to see like Marv Albert or Mike Breen or anybody break down our game, and that's the kind of stuff I look forward to as a Piston fan. As much as I love George Blaha and Greg Kelser, I would love to see a primetime TV game for the Pistons, and so I'm happy that happened, and I'm happy that no fan base really got stuck with it too bad. Denver and San Antonio got 2 games, but I believe they're just games 2 and games 4, I believe, which if the series goes a certain way, those are going to be some of the least interesting games. Who knows? Again, it's all speculation at this point. But, yeah, I just wanted to point that out really quick, that I thought it was cool that the NBA did that, and I hope that going forward that's what they continue to do rather than just sticking a whole series on NBA TV to make it easier for them. All right, so we're not just starting here because it's the Detroit Pistons. Like I said, we're just do conference, and then we'll do the 1-8, then the 2-7, then the 3-6, and then the 4-5, and that's how we'll do for each conference. So that's just kind of how it ended up. The Pistons sneak into the playoffs at the 8th seed, and they face the number 1 seed and the only 60-win team in the NBA, the Milwaukee Bucks. So my thoughts coming into this, number one, I want to see how bad do Brogdon and Mirotic injuries hurt them in this first round matchup. I mean, obviously this is a very winnable series. Milwaukee matches up pretty well against Detroit, considering number one, Detroit doesn't have anybody to put on Giannis, and number two, Andre Drummond, as great as he's been, as much of a stride as he's made defensively, he's always struggled against stretch bigs, and a guy like Brook Lopez is going to absolutely annihilate him. And I think Brook Lopez will have a game where he hits like 6 or 8 threes because of the way Drummond struggles to guard those. So despite that, the Bucks looking weak in last year's playoffs. Now, granted, they had a totally different coach, and I was just not a fan of Jacob Prunty at all. And I even talked about how negative of an impact he had. And so to go from a just subpar coach to an elite coach and Mike Budenholzer, I don't think that that's really going to be much of an issue for the Bucks in the playoffs. Definitely, I think they're going to be a lot better, a lot more cohesive. They're going to be able to get more baskets when they need to. The Bucks in the playoffs against the Celtics last year just looked like they were free balling it the entire game. They didn't have any idea, any clue what they were doing. And, that being said, though, this is a Bucks team that has never gone far in the playoffs. So there is a little bit of trepidation on my part, but I don't expect really any fight from Detroit. The Pistons, in order to win this game, they need to shoot the three well, or to win a game, I should say. They need to shoot the three well, and the Pistons have to have Blake and Drummond be the clear two of the top three on the court that game. And, it's got to be a game where Blake outplays Giannis, and then Drummond is like the clear third best player on the court. But that being said, I'm gonna go with the Bucks in 5. I think the firepower is too strong. Defensively, Milwaukee's too good. They could do too many things. Blake is obviously very limited, so this could be a sweep. And maybe the only reason I'm saying that is because I just spent $50 on tickets to go to Game 3. So maybe that's the only reason I'm saying Bucks in 5, is that I'm praying for a Game 3 win. But that being said, I think that it's going to be Bucks in 4 or 5, just because Blake is hobbled. The only thing I can say to kind of encourage Pistons fans is that when Blake took 5 nights off and played OKC, that was that game where he came out for, 45 points and just absolutely balled out of his mind, and they still lost the game. But Blake played extremely well. So the Pistons do have 5 days before their game. They play on Sunday, or so that's 4. Sorry. So they have 4 days before their game. So Blake has plenty of rest. Now, I don't think Blake's ever going to be 100% for the rest of the season, but it sounds like the Pistons are confident that he's not risking long-term injury, and also the fact that that he can play through this. That it's not that it's something that will diminish his game, no doubt, but it won't necessarily it won't make him unable to compete unless it gets worse. So barring further injury, Blake Griffin should be good to go for the series. He'll no doubt be limited. He'll be, 70, 80%, and that's a huge problem for Detroit, and that's the main reason why I could see the Bucks sweeping. If Blake was 100% and just the team was 100% and the Bucks still had the injuries that they had, I could see this going 5 or 6. Probably I'd still only lean 5 and give the Pistons one game, but that being said, Blake's injury is dramatic to the Pistons, and especially on offense. With an already suffocating Bucks defense, they're going to need every offensive weapon they can get in this series. So, Bucks in 5. Let's jump to Toronto, Orlando, the 2-7 matchup. We finally get to see if Terrence Ross can ball in the playoffs. That's the joke, but honestly, it's a serious thing, because every year we've been talking about Terrence Ross this, Terrence Ross that. He's been, as a fantasy basketball player, man, he's been great. For the last couple of years, truthfully, off and on, but definitely had his moments where he's great. And so that kind of prototype, that player, the Lou Williams, the Terrence Ross, those not super efficient shot creators, are the type of players that really struggle to translate to the playoffs. So I'm wondering to see just what he can do, especially against a suffocating defense in Toronto. But I expect Orlando to play good defense, but they just honestly they don't have the firepower. I'm going Raptors in 4, and I know you usually want to give a team one game that game 3, their first game at home. Orlando's going to be fighting hard. They're so excited to be in the playoffs, and the energy is going to be awesome for game 3. But even having Nikola Vucevic be clearly their best player, Toronto has Marc Gasol and Serge Ibaka to throw at Vucevic, and that's going to be a problem because Vucevic is going to have to be guarded by good defense pretty much the entire time, and on the other end have to deal with a talented center just all throughout the game, all the time he plays, and so that takes away a huge advantage if not Orlando's only advantage in this series. But I do want to take this time to shout out Orlando because they had a great season. I'm happy for them. They're one of the feel-good stories in the league. They really have turned things around the last 30 games, going 21-9, and they deserve this, and I'm happy for them. So unfortunately, they just ran into a really really good team. So Raptors in 4. Next, we got the 3 and the 6, Philly versus Brooklyn. This one seems to be like there's a little bit of chatter, like it could get interesting. Elton Brand came out saying Embiid is questionable to at least play game 1, but then he kind of walked that back. So it's kind of expected that Embiid will play, but it's not for sure. The one thing Philly's weak against is elite guards, is crafty guards. The Nets have good guards, but I wouldn't necessarily call. I mean, yeah, D'Angelo is a crafty guard, but what Philly more so struggles with is those quick guards, like like what a Derrick Rose would have been, what a Westbrook or John Wall or things of that nature, Kyrie, those shifty kind of guards. That's really the type of guards that Philly struggles against, just because Ben Simmons is big. So if you don't have just elite level quickness, because of his size, and again Ben Simmons is like really talented and really athletic himself. He's able to stay with most guards. It's only those like super elite shifty guards that Philly has trouble guarding. So that being said, that is the Nets' only advantage. Jared Allen just absolutely been dominated by Embiid all season long. I'm going with Philly in 4. I don't think this is going to be as competitive as everybody thinks. I know everybody likes the Nets because they're doing a great job and they got a good coach and everything. But what I said about Brooklyn in the early season was that during the regular season they're a tough team to play because they give their all. But these are the playoffs, so they're going to be going against teams that are always giving their all the time, and that's going to kind of take away that advantage, and that's one of their huge advantages. They're just one of those pesky teams you hate to play on just a random Tuesday night back to back. You don't want to play Brooklyn, and that really isn't a factor in the playoffs, so that kind of takes away a lot of their edge. So I'm going Philly in 4. Maybe the Nets get a game, but I'm pretty confident that Philly's going to sweep this, unless, of course, Embiid is out for a considerable amount of time in this series. And even if he's out even if it's just one game, even if he just misses game 1, Philly could still win that game. I could still see them winning that game very easily, especially because Tobias Harris has been uncomfortable. I know he's been struggling, but I think if Embiid goes out, that kind of gives Tobias free reins, and I think Tobias I think he's going to step up when he needs to. Indiana versus Boston, another one that people are hyping up that I'm just not buying. Pacers bigs will no doubt be a problem for the Celtics. Like Turner versus Horford is a key matchup because Horford is so vital on both ends of the floor, and Turner is a Defensive Player of the Year candidate. But I expect, because of Horford's veteran mindset and just immense IQ, that he's going to end up winning that matchup and getting the better of Miles Turner. And that's really the only place where Indiana has the advantage. They don't, unfortunately, have Oladipo, and that really sucks because they need not only a guy who can score and create, but they also need a player who can defend. And Victor Oladipo was very much a great two-way player. No one in this series on Indiana's side can touch Kyrie. The Smart injury hurts the Celtics, but not bad in this series because, again, without Oladipo, and I have doubts that Brogdon's recent play will translate extremely well to the playoffs. Like, I don't think I don't think he has the shot creating ability to really have to really be like an elite, consistent postseason scorer. I think he's a guy who's again, I think he's a player who's better in the regular season, not because of any pressure narratives or anything like that, but just because of his athleticism. He doesn't have the highest caliber of athleticism, and you kind of need that in the playoffs. And so I don't think Brogdon's game will translate as well. Don't get me wrong. I'm not predicting that he's going to be a bum in the playoffs. I think he'll still do 15, maybe even 20, just because Indiana's really struggling to score. But I don't think he's going to be an efficient 20 points, and I don't think he's going to be a alpha dog player that can really carry them to any games. So, that being said, Indiana's a tough team. They play hard. They play together. They all know their roles, so that's why I expect them to get a game. But I'm predicting Boston in 5. The Smart injury, again, it hurts them, but I don't see the Smart injury playing a factor until another series in the future where they have to face a team with more offensive firepower than Indiana. Let's jump to the West now. The Warriors and the Clippers. This one's easy for me too as well. The Warriors dominate this series in 4, but I'm curious to see how these Clippers players play. Like, I'm curious to watch Montrezl Harrell, Lou Williams. It's been a couple years since we've seen Danilo Gallinari in the playoffs. So I'm looking forward to seeing what these players can do in the playoffs, just because of the fact that if the Clippers are going to get the star like everyone thinks they are, like a Kawhi and a Jimmy, or a Kawhi and even KD is what they're trying to do and trying to pull off the ultimate heist. But I want to see how well these players can play in the playoffs, and if they can play well, I think that will really bode well for the Clippers moving forward into the offseason, because they're no doubt going to lose this series, of course, but at the same time, they are also going to be players that they have that they have the rights to retain them, or they have under contract. And so I want to see if these players play well, like if Harrell plays well, if Lou plays well, if Gallinari plays well, if these guys play well, and then I'm going to start looking at that team like, okay, if you add a star, then that really is something special, and all of a sudden they go from not just like a miracle 8th seed to a really, really good team. And so I'm really curious to see how Harrell, Lou, and Gallinari in particular play. But a lot of those Clippers guys, I want to see how they do in that series. I also love to see Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. He's been having a very sneaky good year, and I like what he's doing. I wish the Pistons could have got him. I wish maybe Stan Van Gundy could have found a way to negotiate harder on the picks and kept Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But I digress. The Nuggets and the Spurs is the next matchup, the 2 and the 7. This is the perfect storyline, the one that everybody wanted to see. It's the new up-and-comer versus the veteran squad. These two teams are very even. Like, I looked up the numbers since January 1st. They're near identical, with Nuggets holding slight edges in offensive and defensive ratings. To me, what this series will come down to is I think the key is the front court. The Spurs have always struggled with athleticism, but the Nuggets front court outside of Plumlee does not have that, and that is huge for a player like Aldridge. Aldridge is not going to be played off the floor in this series. David Bertans is not going to be played off the floor in this series, just because Denver doesn't have the athleticism in the front. That's going to be a problem. If you look at the Spurs and you look at all the teams they've lost to over the years, pretty much throughout the whole Popovich era, most of the time when they lose, it's to a super athletic team. They lost to Oklahoma City Thunder before multiple times. They've lost to the Miami Heat with LeBron, Wade, and Bosh when that team was super athletic. And so Spurs have always traditionally struggled with athleticism, with elite level athleticism, and the Nuggets are probably one of the least athletic elite teams in the league. So that kind of bodes well for San Antonio. I'd actually say that San Antonio's front court is even more athletic than Denver's, and that could pose a problem for Denver. So that being said, I think Aldridge is going to get the best of Jokic in this series, despite Jokic being the far better player. I just think this is Jokic's first series in the playoffs, and I want to see what he does. And, I expect Denver to play well at home, though. They're the number one record in the league at home. Well, the Spurs are -9 on the road for a season. I I ultimately lean Spurs in 7. I'm just trusting the Spurs because guys like Murray on the Nuggets, who has been one of their best players for Denver this whole season, he's been super inconsistent. And that'll be tough for a young team to overcome because when you're a young team and you're starting to get in those moments of uncomfortability and you don't really know who you can trust because let's say Jamal Murray, is someone who's been super inconsistent, so you don't really have the utmost confidence that he's going to make the shot that you need him to make, so it's just things like that I think are going to cause and end up being the demise of Denver. But Denver being an elite home team, the best home team in the NBA, they have the number one record with 34 wins and 7 losses at home. They've been playing great at home, so I think that will play into and that will help them get a couple games, and they might get one on the road, just because San Antonio is not an elite home team as well. But that being said, I'm going Spurs in 7. I'm trusting the veteran. I'm going with the cliche and trusting the veteran squad. I just think that again, in moments when it gets uncomfortable, I could see Denver kind of crumbling because they just don't know who to turn to. Because Jokic isn't necessarily a go-to bucket getter just yet. He's improving, but I don't see him as a go-to scorer yet. And Murray's their closest thing to a go-to scorer, and he's been inconsistent. So it's gonna be tough for them when things go haywire and everything is a mess. All right, next we got the 3 seed Portland Trailblazers versus the 6 seed Oklahoma City Thunder. Oklahoma City Thunder has struggled for the last 3.5 weeks before these last 5 games, but they should be the favorite given their star power. The injury to Nurkic for Portland, plus CJ McCollum is struggling. If Paul George could get healthier, OKC's size and physicality should dominate Portland pretty easily. The Cantor and Dame pick and roll defense is going to be torch. This to me is one of those series where it's going to be OKC in 5, and suddenly, I'm just putting this out there now. Suddenly, it seems like the way the seeding has aligned that OKC has a real shot at the conference finals, which is funny because about a month and a half ago, everybody was heralding OKC as the greatest chance to beat the Warriors in the West, and then they just fall off a cliff because PG's not healthy and Russ starts to dip in his game a little bit. Then all of a sudden they win 5 straight, and then the seeding breaks out just perfectly for them, so that Houston and Golden State are on the same side of the bracket, and OKC really. I could see OKC beating San Antonio or Denver in the second round. So all of a sudden they seem to have a pretty easy path considering the Rockets, Jazz, and Warriors are all on one side of the bracket. So just putting that out there. Again, I put OKC in 5 over Portland. It might even be a sweep. Rockets versus Jazz, the last series, as I just mentioned. The Rockets went 9-1 last year against the Jazz, of course, playing them in the playoffs and the regular season. Jazz have an elite defense. They're peaking at the right time. I trust their offense more than last year. They've kind of found ways to make it less reliant on Donovan Mitchell, which I like a lot because that was my big problem with them last year. But the key matchup is the bigs, is at the center spot. Capella versus Gobert. Gobert has been an absolute beast this year, so I expect Gobert to win that matchup. But if Capella can be near Gobert level to kind of neutralize that advantage, that's absolutely huge for Houston. Houston's defense isn't where it was at last year, but if Harden doesn't fatigue, the Rockets should win this series given the home court advantage, plus Harden and Paul being arguably the 2 best players in the series. Especially if Paul asserts himself to be above Donovan Mitchell in this series, then there's no way that the Jazz can win. But the 4 best players in this series are pretty obvious. It's James Harden, Chris Paul, Donovan Mitchell, and Rudy Gobert, not in that order. But so it's going to be really interesting to see how that dynamic plays out. If either Capella or somebody on Utah can kind of break into that 4 or 5 spot, then I think all of a sudden that can help swing the series. I'm going Rockets in 6. I don't feel confident about this at all. This is the one series that I really don't have a confident opinion in. That and the Denver San Antonio. Those are the two series that I'm struggling with. The rest of them I see as pretty clear cut and day, easy first round matchups. But that being said, Rockets Jazz. I'm going Houston in 6, and it's just because Harden is just unbelievably amazing this year, and as long as he doesn't fatigue, I'm just going with the team that has the best player and home court advantage, and that's huge for the playoffs. So that's the first round of the playoffs. Now let's quickly go through the awards. I say quickly because I already went through the awards last time on the podcast. That was a couple weeks ago, and honestly, not much has changed. The first team guards are still locked with Harden and Curry, and then the forwards are still locked for first team, Giannis and Paul George, and then the center, of course, I ended up going with Embiid. I can't remember which I had at the point of last year, but I had I believe I had Embiid just because of I did have Embiid because just the simple fact that Embiid is doing it better on both ends of the floor than Jokic. Jokic has been awesome. He's been on a better team. He's been a better quote-unquote leader of his team. But I'm not going to argue. Somebody puts Jokic first team, but I went Embiid. So then second team, I had Kyrie. I had Dame. That was super easy for the guards. For the forwards, I ended up going with KD. Of course, was the easy lock, and then I went with LeBron. I know some people want to put him on like the third team. That's just to me ridiculous. Just because it's not ridiculous, I should say. What is ridiculous is the people that want to leave LeBron off and put on Danilo Gallinari. I get Danilo Gallinari's had a good year, but we're talking LeBron James. LeBron is LeBron. I don't see a reason to argue that point any further, truthfully. So then I have Jokic as my center for the second team. Then the third team, I'll kick off with the center position. I had Rudy Gobert to round it out just because he's been an amazing player on both ends of the floor this year. Then my guards, I went with the same two that I had, which was Westbrook and Beal. Beal, I went with the slight hair over Kemba. Now, I said that I would walk it back and take Kemba if Kemba led his team to the playoffs, and even though he did his utmost and dragged them to as close as they could possibly be to making the playoffs, unfortunately they did not make it. And Bradley Beal's just been an absolute beast. Like, his shooting percentages are off the charts. He's a two guard and he's shooting 55% from the field, and that's just ridiculous as a shooting guard. And he's averaging, since February, he's averaging 30, I think, still. And he's been averaging 5 rebounds, 6 assists. I mean, he's just been doing it all. And really just been, honestly, like, this Washington team has been, decent since Bradley Beal's kind of taken the reins, And so I think Bradley Beal should be rewarded. He's had a great season. Westbrook, I get that he's inefficient. I get that his game's even tailed off the last couple weeks. But, man, Westbrook just has a level of impact on the game that is absolutely undeniable, that people just absolutely hate going against him just because of the intensity that he brings and the sheer force of nature that he is. So I just can't see the idea of leaving him off the All-NBA guards. So, again, my backcourt is Westbrook and Beal, and then my forwards, I went with Blake Griffin, obviously, and Kawhi Leonard. That was a pretty obvious decision as well. Kawhi was third team because of the missed games. Blake was obviously just everything he did for Detroit. I mean, Detroit was nowhere near a playoff caliber team if they didn't have Blake Griffin this year. Blake Griffin carried this team, played 75 games, missed most of the games due to rest until that end stretch. I mean, he played I think it was something like 70 of 72 games or something like that, where he only sat 2 games because of rest. And and so they weren't even actually injury related. And so he had an amazing year, extremely durable. Unfortunately, he's kind of limping right now, but he's been absolutely phenomenal beast, and he's been just a whole nother level. So now you have the award time. Let's start with Rookie of the Year. I went with Luka over Trae Young. I'll admit it became closer than I thought. It became a lot closer than I thought. Most improved, I went with Pascal. I considered even doing Giannis or De'Aaron Fox or Sabonis, but again, I went with Pascal. Sixth man was Lou Williams, no debate. Derrick Rose had an amazing start to the year, but since then it's been all Lou Williams as far as sixth man goes. And then defensive player of the year, I went Giannis over Gobert. And I'll admit, because I know a lot of people are going Gobert, and I think Gobert, if you're asking me to predict who the voters will pick, I think they'll pick Gobert. But Giannis has just been absolutely phenomenal. And I wanted to figure this out, and so I actually should look this up. The last NBA player to win Defensive Player of the Year and MVP, Defensive Player of the Year and MVP. Yeah. So okay. So hold on. I don't think it's ever been done in the same year. I don't think it's ever been done in the same year. Let me just make sure, because I know a lot of the MVP years. Michael Jordan did not win it. Hakeem, I don't know. That wasn't his MVP season. Yeah. Yeah, no, it's never been done. So there have been players who have won both awards, but never in the same year. Giannis, to me, absolutely deserves consideration. So I went with Giannis. Maybe it was me just wanting the history to happen, but the fact that he's averaging so many rebounds, steals, blocks, he's doing it all, both ends of the floor, and he really is just an absolute force on defense. And the Bucks have been the number one net rating team in the year, mainly because of their defense and how just elite they've been. So I think that I went with Giannis over the slightest hair, but I'm not going to really falter picking Gobert because I mean Gobert's numbers are pretty much damn near similar to Giannis, especially the advanced metrics and the tracking. So it's actually nuts. But I went with Giannis. Maybe, again, I'm a little bit biased because I wanted to see history happen. But regardless, that brings me to my MVP. And I went with Giannis. Now, this was hard. This was tough. I thought about it a lot of times. Went back and forth a lot of times. For a lot of the year, I thought it was Harden. Pretty much from January to March, I thought it was Harden. But, even though Harden played great down the stretch and absolutely played fantastic, at the end of the day, Giannis really elevated this team to a whole nother level and made this team. And I don't get the argument that Giannis has a better support cast. Like, I think Giannis makes that support cast better. I don't think it's necessarily if you take those players in a vacuum. If you take out Harden of the Rockets and Giannis of the Bucks, like I don't think the Bucks are this drastically better team that everybody thinks. Now I get it. I'm not mad if anybody picks Harden because Harden is having an amazing year. Offensively, you can only compare him to two people, Jordan and Wilt. That is how good he has been offensively. That is how insane he has been. And so I'm not mad at anybody who picks James Harden. Believe me, I'll be happy if James Harden wins the award. But I just, if I have to go with what I see, I'm going with Giannis. Harden, again, I don't want to say he's been bad defensively because he's actually an amazing post defender and he's been getting a lot of steals and he's been doing a lot of awesome things on defense. He's actually become a sneakily good defender. I won't say great, but good. But Giannis has been absolutely amazing on both ends of the floor. He's on the better team. I think he impacts his team more. Like the on-off numbers drastically favor Giannis. So that being said, I'm going with Giannis by the slightest hair, and Giannis is my MVP and Defensive Player of the Year. And I don't know. I think he'll get MVP. It seems like it seems like the consensus around the league is that Giannis is going to get it. He's going to edge out Harden. That's what it seems like right now, but they're not entirely sure. And I don't know. I don't know where it's gonna go, but I'm curious to find out. And that'll do it for today's episode. Thank you everybody for tuning in. This was a really fun episode. The playoffs are here. I'm excited. I'm really excited to get this going. And I'll be watching every single game all weekend long, as I'm sure all you NBA fans will be, because this regular season, if you're like me, this felt like a total drag, and I'm absolutely happy that it's over and I'm ready for the playoffs. So if you want to talk to me about basketball and, just let me know what you think of my picks for all NBA, the awards. Oh, I didn't do all defense. Hold on. I didn't do all defense. Sorry, I shouldn't wrap this up too soon. I knew I was wrapping up too soon. All defense, I went first team, Marcus Smart, Drew Holiday, Giannis, Paul George, Rudy Gobert. Giannis, Paul George, and Rudy Gobert were no doubt locks. The guards were kind of tricky. Then team 2, I went Eric Bledsoe, Klay Thompson for the guards. PJ Tucker, Draymond Green, who's still clearly one of the best defenders in the league when healthy, and Joel Embiid, who's been an absolute force of nature on defense. So those are my 2 teams. I'm sorry, I forgot to say all defense, but yeah, those are my 2 teams. I considered Danny Green, but I felt like Danny Green was more a product of not that he's not a great defender. He's still probably one of the best 10 wing defenders in the league. But I just felt like he really has a great benefit of having multiple people around him that are elite defenders. Pascal, Kawhi, all that. Even Lowry, who they've low key shifted to off ball and plays a lot of off ball to kind of rest on defense. But still, I think that helps. And granted, Golden State's a good defensive team too, especially when they're locked in. But Klay is the guy who every night says, "Give me the best player. I will do that. I will take that challenge," and he guards them with pretty high success. I almost went Pascal Siakam over PJ Tucker. That was an interesting debate, but I just felt like absolutely how amazing Tucker's been, and Pascal's been great too. So I'm not mad at anybody who picks Pascal over Tucker, but Tucker's been absolutely phenomenal in the way he's played. Defense this year and last year in the playoffs. He was phenomenal too. So I felt like he deserved that recognition. Eric Bledsoe's been great in Milwaukee too. Marcus Smart was a no-brainer guard on the first team, and Drew Holiday was a no-brainer guard. So it really was that last guard spot that I was struggling with. The 2 centers were easy, Gobert and Embiid, with consideration to Miles Turner, who's played absolutely phenomenal. Paul George and Giannis were easy locks for forwards, and so was Draymond Green. So it really came down to that last forward and that last guard spot, but that's where I went. So now we can end the podcast. There you have it, everybody. That is my all defensive teams, all NBA teams, the MVP, Defensive Player of the Year, 6-man, Most Improved, Rookie of the Year, and my thoughts on each round of the playoffs. Thank you, everyone, for listening here on Sports Radio Detroit, the Platte NBA Minute. I am, of course, your host, Chris Platte. You can find me on Twitter at RealChrisPlatte. That's ChrisPlatte. I'm sure you know how to spell real. And from there on out, if you want to talk to Sports Radio Detroit and kind of get in contact with them and let them know what you think of my takes as well, that is at Sports Radio Detroit on all of the social medias. Be sure to give them a follow and a shout out as well. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in for this special episode of the Platte NBA Minute. I'm very happy. I'm very excited that NBA playoffs is here, and I can't wait. So if you follow me on Twitter, I'm sure you'll be seeing a lot of live tweeting as the playoffs go on. Thank you, everyone, and have a good weekend.
This has been an SRD production.
Hi, this is Jason Pinkett from Pucking Around and Spinning the Wheels on Sports Radio Detroit. Check us out every Sunday over on the SRD Hockey feed on Spotify, TuneIn Radio, Podbean, iTunes, and Stitcher. That's SRD Hockey in your search bar. New episodes every week.